forced to marry a paralyzed millionaire, until her kiss brought him back to life. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain fell in silver sheets over the Seattle Bay as Elena Moore stood beneath the glass canopy of the Carter estate. Cameras flashed like lightning, every click capturing the moment she lost her freedom. The pianist played softly, but the melody sounded like morning. In the reflection of the marble floor, she saw herself in white silk, a bride by appearance, a hostage by choice. Nathaniel Carter sat motionless in his wheelchair at the end of the aisle, his expression unreadable under the glow of crystal chandeliers. They called him a genius, once a billionaire tech visionary. Now the tabloids called him the paralyzed recluse of Seattle. He had been bound to that chair since the yacht explosion 6 months ago. Tonight he was about to marry a stranger who didn't love him, and she was about to marry a man who no longer believed in love. The priest's voice echoed faintly, drowned by the whispers of the guests. "Do you, Elena Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She could barely hear her own heartbeat over the murmurs. Somewhere beyond the crowd, she could almost hear her mother's voice. "We have no choice, Elena. They're paying for the surgery." Her hands trembled around the bouquet. The smell of roses mixed with the scent of antiseptic that still lingered on her clothes from the hospital. She looked up at Nathaniel. His gaze was calm, cold, precise. There was no trace of pity, only control. "I do," she whispered. Nathaniel's voice followed, steady but lifeless. "I do." When the priest said, "Then you may kiss the bride," the room fell silent. Flash bulbs clicked in anticipation. Elena's pulse raced as she leaned down. Their lips met briefly, barely touching, but in that instant something flickered. His hand twitched. The nurse standing behind him glanced at the monitor on his wrist, a faint signal, a small, steady pulse that hadn't appeared in months. But no one else noticed. The applause erupted hollow and metallic, echoing through marble and glass. Later in the grand reception hall, chandeliers gleamed above a sea of perfect strangers. Elena moved like a ghost between polished tables and polite smiles. She overheard a woman whisper, "She's the charity bride." Another murmured, "Poor man. He could have anyone and he chose this." Elena forced a faint smile and looked toward the terrace where rain slid down the tall windows like tears. The music was beautiful, but it didn't belong to her. Nathaniel remained near the stage, surrounded by cameras and murmurs. His composure was immaculate, every movement precise, every gesture rehearsed. When their eyes met, he looked away first. The distance between them was only a few steps, but it felt like miles. She turned toward the glass doors and stepped outside. The cold air stung her face. She breathed it in like punishment. A voice spoke behind her. "You're not used to this kind of performance, are you?" Nathaniel had wheeled himself onto the terrace. The rainlight shimmered on his dark hair. Elena turned slowly, startled. "I'm not used to pretending," she said quietly. "You'll get used to it," he replied. "Pretending is what we do best." She hesitated, unsure if he was mocking her or himself. "I didn't ask for this," she said finally. "Neither did I," he answered. For a moment, silence filled the space between thunderclaps. Then his tone changed, cool, controlled again. "This marriage is a contract, Miss Moore. 12 months. You'll find the terms clear and generous." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound like business." "It is," he said flatly. "You follow the terms and your mother will receive full medical coverage." Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. "And what do you get out of this?" He looked toward the rain. "An image, stability, maybe silence." His words were sharp, but behind them she heard something fragile. "Fatigue, maybe fear. You don't have to play the villain," she said softly. His gaze returned to her. "Someone has to." When the thunder rolled again, she turned toward the ocean, her reflection faint in the glass. "So this is what it feels like to sell your future," she murmured. He didn't respond. Behind them, the lights from the ballroom shimmered like broken gold blurring in the rain. Later that night, Elena stood before the tall window of the bridal suite, watching the storm over the bay. Her wedding gown hung from a chair, damp at the hem. The diamond ring felt like a shackle on her hand. The city lights below flickered against the water. Somewhere down the hall she heard the soft hum of Nathaniel's motorized chair and the distant rhythm of the machines that kept him alive. For a moment she wondered if he ever slept, or if he, like her, feared what dreams might bring. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, whispering to herself, "You did this for her. Just breathe. Just survive." Behind her the door clicked open. Nathaniel's reflection appeared in the window, pale against the storm. "I'll have the agreement sent to your room in the morning," he said. "You'll sign it and we'll begin." She nodded without turning. "I understand." He paused. "You're not what I expected." She smiled faintly. "Neither are you." He hesitated, then wheeled himself closer. "Good night, Mrs. Carter." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. When he left, the room felt emptier than before. Elena stared at her reflection once more, at the woman who had traded her freedom for a promise, and whispered, "You don't have to fall in love with him. Just don't forget how to stand." But somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and fear, she knew this story wasn't about falling. It was about learning how to stand again, one heart, one step, one impossible vow at a time. The morning light crept through the rain-streaked windows of the Carter mansion. Elena woke in a bed too soft in a room, too quiet, surrounded by walls that didn't feel like hers. The sound of waves beyond the glass was steady, rhythmic, almost cruel. She lay still for a moment, remembering the night before, the vows, the kiss, the applause that had sounded more like thunder. The smell of roses still clung to her hair. When she finally sat up, the world felt heavy with silence. Somewhere downstairs she heard faint voices, footsteps, and the distant whir of machinery. She found a simple note placed neatly on the bedside table. "Breakfast at 8. Mr. Carter requests your presence in the study." The handwriting was precise and elegant, just like him. She sighed, pulling a cardigan over her shoulders, then made her way down the long marble hallway. Portraits of the Carter family lined the walls, smiling faces frozen in time before the accident that changed everything. Nathaniel appeared in several of them, standing tall beside his mother, his expression open and confident. She stopped for a moment before one photograph of him in a navy suit holding a glass of champagne, his smile radiant and alive. That version of him felt like a ghost haunting this house. When she reached the study, the door was already open. Nathaniel sat behind a massive walnut desk, the morning light casting a silver halo on his dark hair. He didn't look up when she entered. "You're late," he said, his tone neutral, his attention fixed on the laptop in front of him. "It's only 8:10, she replied softly. "I'm not accustomed to being summoned." He glanced up, then his eye cool, but not unkind. "Consider it a formality. There are details you need to understand." He closed the laptop and gestured to a slim leather folder on the desk. The word agreement was embossed in gold letters on the cover. "Our arrangement," he said. "You'll find it straightforward." Elena hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe defiance, pushed her to open it. Her eyes skimmed through the clauses, separate rooms, no personal involvement beyond public appearances, participation in charity events twice a month, and a monthly stipend deposited into her account. Her mother's medical expenses would be paid in full until the contract's expiration. At the bottom of the page was a neat signature, Nathaniel Carter. She looked up at him. "And what do you expect in return besides the act?" He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Discretion, punctuality, no sentimentality." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound easy." He met her eyes. "It is if you stop pretending this is anything else." His words were sharp, but his voice wasn't cruel. It was weary, as if every sentence cost him more than he wanted to admit. She set the folder down carefully. "You really think dignity can be written into a contract?" His expression didn't change. "Dignity," he said quietly, "is a luxury for people who haven't fallen." The words struck something in her, but she didn't respond. Outside, the rain began again, a steady rhythm against the glass walls. She wondered if it ever stopped raining here. A nurse entered carrying a tray of medication and set it beside him. Nathaniel reached for the glass of water, but his hand trembled slightly. Without thinking, Elena stepped forward and steadied it. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment something flickered between them, something fragile, unexpected. He froze, then pulled back sharply. "Don't," he said. "I can manage." She stepped back, flustered. "I was only trying to help." "That's the problem," he muttered. "Everyone is." The nurse looked between them, uneasy, then left in silence. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "You'll have your room key and staff access by noon," he said. "Dinner at 7. Don't feel obligated to attend." Elena nodded once. Understood. As she turned to leave, she paused. "I didn't marry you to pity you, Mercader." He looked up, his voice low. "Then we might actually survive this year." The next few days passed in careful routine. The mansion had a rhythm of its own, a quiet hum of servants, the distant hiss of rain, the ticking of clocks. Elena spent most mornings in the conservatory sketching to keep her thoughts from unraveling. Sometimes she heard Nathaniel's voice through the hallways, giving instructions to his assistant or speaking with his doctor. In the afternoon, she accompanied him to physical therapy sessions, though he never asked her to. Dr. Wells guided him through slow, painful exercises, each movement deliberate, each failure visible. Nathaniel pushed himself hard, too hard. "You're forcing it," Dr. Wells warned one morning. "You'll strain the muscles again." Nathaniel's reply was cold. "Pain is the only thing that reminds me I'm still alive." Elena watched from the doorway, her chest tightening as he gripped the steel bars, his arms trembling with effort. Sweat rolled down his temple. When he finally collapsed back into the chair, he refused to look at her. Later, she left a towel beside him in silence. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I know," she answered. "But someone should." He said nothing more. At night, she often found herself wandering through the halls, unable to sleep. The house was full of echoes, faint music, the rustle of curtains, the distant hum of Nathaniel's chair, moving through the corridors. One night, she followed the sound of piano keys. The melody was broken, hesitant. She stepped into the music room and saw him there, his left hand moving over the keys with effort. The notes wavered, but held a certain haunting beauty. "You play," she whispered. He didn't stop. "I used to," he said quietly. "Now it's just muscle memory." "It's beautiful," she said. "It's practice," he corrected though. A faint smile touched his lips. When he finally stopped, she asked, "Why keep trying?" He looked at her for a long moment, eyes shadowed by firelight. "Because the day I stop trying is the day I stop being me." She nodded, unable to speak. The rain began again outside, soft but steady like applause for something invisible. She turned to leave, but his voice followed her. "Good night, Elena." She paused, surprised to hear her name for the first time on his lips. "Good night," she whispered back. In her room later, she opened her sketchbook and drew him not as the man in the wheelchair, but as the one who sat at the piano fighting for something he couldn't yet name. Beneath the sketch, she wrote, "He doesn't need saving. He just needs someone to believe he can be whole again." Then she closed the book, turned off the light, and listened to the rain until it lulled her to sleep. The sound of morning rain had become part of Elena's life, a soft, endless rhythm that followed her through the Carter mansion. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, yet every day still felt like she was walking through someone else's dream. The mansion remained cold and beautiful, its corridors echoing with the hum of machines and the faint click of Nathaniel's cane against the marble floors. He had begun walking again in short intervals, slow and strained but determined. The sight of him proud and silent carried both triumph and sadness. She found herself watching him more often than she meant to. During breakfast, he read business reports while she stirred her coffee without drinking it. During therapy sessions, she stood at the edge of the room as he gripped the steel bars, sweat shining on his temples. He rarely spoke to her, but when their eyes met, there was something unspoken there, acknowledgement, maybe respect, or something deeper neither of them wanted to name. One afternoon, the physical therapist called in sick. Nathaniel insisted on continuing alone. Elena walked past the open door of the rehabilitation room and stopped. He was standing between the bars, bracing his hands tightly, his jaw clenched. His arms trembled from the strain. She stepped inside quietly. "You shouldn't push yourself without supervision," she said. He didn't look up. "I don't need a witness for failure. You need a partner," she replied. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "This isn't a romance novel, Elena." She crossed her arms, her tone calm. "No, it's not. But it's also not a punishment." His eyes flicked up at her, then cold and sharp. You think I'm punishing myself? She met his gaze steadily. Aren't you? He said nothing, just shifted his weight and tried again. For a second, he managed to stand upright, his shoulders steady before his legs gave out. The sound of metal echoed as he collapsed. She gasped and rushed forward, kneeling beside him. He turned away, furious, humiliated. Don't touch me, he muttered. You'll make it worse. You're bleeding, she said, quietly pointing to the scrape on his arm. He looked at it, then at her. The anger drained from his face, leaving something rawer, shame, maybe grief. She tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it gently to the wound. You don't have to prove anything to me, she whispered. I'm not doing this for you, he said, his voice low but trembling. Then who? She asked softly. He didn't answer. She stayed there beside him until his breathing steadied. When he finally spoke again, it was barely audible. They said, I'd never stand again. That's what kills me. Not the pain, the memory of being told I'd already reached my limit. Her hand lingered over his for just a second before she pulled away. Then prove them wrong, she said, but don't destroy yourself to do it. He looked up at her eyes, dark with exhaustion. Why do you care? She hesitated. Because no one cared for me when I needed it. The confession surprised them both. That evening the storm broke over the city. Thunder rolled through the bay, shaking the windows. Nathaniel sat near the fireplace in the study, his cane resting against the arm of the chair. Elena entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. You should be resting, she said. So should you, he replied without looking up. She set the cup beside him. You don't drink tea, he said. I do tonight, she answered. For a moment he almost smiled. They sat in silence, listening to the wind batter the glass. The flames danced in the reflection of his eyes. You were brave today, she said suddenly. I fell, he corrected. Yes, she said softly, but you tried. He turned his gaze toward her, and something in his expression softened. You think effort counts more than results sometimes, she said. It's the only thing that keeps people alive. He leaned back, studying her. You talk like you've lived 1,000 lives. She laughed quietly. Sometimes it feels that way. What happened, he asked, to make you so sure of pain? Her hands tightened around the cup. When my father died, my mother fell apart. The bills came, the debts followed. I learned quickly that dreams don't pay for medicine. He nodded slowly. So you traded them for survival. I suppose I did, she said, her voice barely a whisper. And you, I traded mine for control, he admitted. It's the only thing I had left. A long pause stretched between them. Outside, lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the scar along his jaw. Elena's gaze lingered on it. Does it still hurt? She asked. Every day, he said. But not as much as it used to. She nodded. That's how healing works. He turned to her again. You talk about healing like it's easy. It's not, she replied. It's just possible. For a moment the firelight flickered across her face, and Nathaniel saw something in her expression that unsettled him, compassion without pity. It was the one thing he'd forgotten existed. When she stood to leave, he said quietly, Elena. She stopped in the doorway. Yes. Thank you for staying. Her smile was faint but real. I'll stay until you can stand on your own. After that, you won't need me. After she left, Nathaniel sat in the quiet room, the fire crackling softly. He touched the edge of the cup she'd left behind, still warm. Her words echoed in his mind, refusing to fade. Healing isn't easy, it's just possible. That night he dreamed of standing not in pain, but in peace. In the dream she was beside him, sunlight spilling across the floor, her hand steady on his arm. When he woke, the rain had stopped, and for the first time since the accident, he felt something other than emptiness. It wasn't victory or relief, it was hope, quiet, fragile, and alive. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm. The house felt less like a prison now, more like a strange kind of refuge. The morning routine began the same way each day, Elena reading by the window, Nathaniel in the therapy room, the distant sound of rain or piano drifting between them. Yet something had shifted, invisible but undeniable. They no longer moved like strangers passing through the same space. Every glance lingered longer than it should, every silence carried a weight neither dared to name. One morning, she found him in the library. He was trying to reach a book on the top shelf from his chair. His arm stretched upward, but the tip of his fingers fell short by inches. Without a word, she stepped forward, pulled the book down, and handed it to him. Their hands brushed. He looked up, half annoyed, half surprised. "I could have managed," he said. "I know," she replied, "but it was faster this way." He studied her for a moment, the corner of his mouth curving into something almost like amusement. "You're impossible." "Thank you," she said, and left before he could respond. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived. Nathaniel's lawyer, Mr. Douglas, entered the study carrying a thin folder and a fountain pen carved from dark wood. "I've brought the updated terms," Douglas said, placing the folder on the desk. Nathaniel glanced at it briefly. "Leave it. She should review it," the lawyer insisted. Nathaniel sighed. "She will." When Douglas left, Elena appeared in the doorway. "What was that about?" she asked. He pushed the folder toward her. "Our agreement, revised and sealed." She hesitated, sitting across from him. Her eyes scanned the paper silently. Clause 6. No personal involvement beyond appearances. Separate rooms. Maintain distance during public events. It felt clinical, like a diagnosis. She reached the last line and noticed something handwritten in his own penmanship. "You are free to leave any time you wish." Her throat tightened. "Why add this?" she asked softly. Nathaniel's eyes stayed on the fire. "Because I don't want you here out of pity or obligation." "Both." For a long moment neither spoke. The flames cracked and hissed, casting gold light over his face. Finally she said, "You think I'm here because I feel sorry for you, aren't you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I'm here because I gave my word." "Words break easily," he said. "People do too." That night she couldn't sleep. The storm outside had passed, but the air inside felt heavier. She walked barefoot down the hallway, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. Through a half-open door she saw Nathaniel in the study again, asleep in his chair. The fire had burned low shadows crawling across his face. His cane rested on the floor beside him. His hand twitched slightly, as if reaching for something in a dream. Elena hesitated, then stepped inside. She adjusted the blanket that had slipped from his shoulders, tucking it gently beneath his arm. He stirred, but didn't wake. For a moment she stood there watching the quiet rise and fall of his chest. The man who had once seemed carved from stone now looked achingly human. She realized with a start that she wanted to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The next morning, Nathaniel woke to the faint scent of coffee. Elena sat by the window reading. "You were up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. He nodded slowly, adjusting the blanket draped over him. "You did this?" She looked up startled. "The blanket?" He gave a faint smile. "You think anyone else would dare?" She shrugged lightly. "You looked cold." "I was," he admitted, his voice softer than usual. They shared breakfast together for the first time since the wedding. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was tentative, fragile, almost peaceful. Afterwards, she asked, "Do you ever miss it, the world outside these walls?" He looked out the window. "I used to. Now, I think I miss who I was in it." "You're still him," she said. He shook his head. "No. That man died the night the engine failed." "Then what's left?" she asked. He met her gaze steadily. "The part learning how to live again." That afternoon, the rain returned in a fine mist. Nathaniel sat by the piano, playing softly. The melody drifted through the hallways, tender and broken. Elena paused at the door, listening. The notes weren't perfect, but they were alive. He looked up when he noticed her standing there. "You're not interrupting," he said. She stepped closer. "It's beautiful." "It's practice," he corrected, though the faint smile returned. She sat beside him on the bench, close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder. "What were you playing?" she asked. "Something unfinished," he said. "Like us." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He froze for half a second, then looked at her, a slow, unguarded smile spreading across his face. "Maybe." A knock on the door broke the moment. It was Oliver, his assistant, holding a phone. "Mr. Carter, the press has been calling nonstop. They're demanding an update about your recovery." Nathaniel's smile vanished. "Tell them I'm alive. That's enough." When Oliver left, he turned back to her. "The world wants a show, Elena. They don't care if I walk again, they just want a story." She reached for the piano keys, pressing one softly, then let them see the truth. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "And what truth is that? That strength isn't standing alone," she said. "It's standing together." Later that evening, as the rain eased into silence, Nathaniel found himself thinking about her words. Standing together. He'd always thought strength meant control, isolation, endurance, but now watching her walk through the hallways, quiet, steady, determined, he wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe strength was the courage to let someone in. When the lights dimmed and the house fell silent, he whispered to himself, "You make me want to try again." Down the hall in her room, Elena opened her sketchbook. This time she drew two figures standing side by side, one leaning slightly, the other holding him upright, not out of duty, but of choice. Beneath it, she wrote a single word, "Together." The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Carter mansion, painting the marble floor in streaks of pale gold. For the first time in weeks, the rain had stopped. Elena stood in the garden, her hands lightly dusted with soil, as she arranged a few wildflowers into the empty vases on the terrace. The air smelled of earth and salt from the nearby bay. She hadn't noticed how much she'd missed silence until now, a silence not made of emptiness but peace. Inside, Nathaniel watched her from the study window. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning it into something almost luminous. For a man who had spent years mastering logic, he found it strange how quickly she had begun to disrupt it. He'd built his life on control, on structure, and yet she moved through his world like light through glass, impossible to contain. When she came inside carrying the vase, she froze upon seeing him by the piano. "You're up early," she said, setting the flowers down carefully. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. I thought I'd bring life to this house." His eyes followed the small bouquet. "It's working." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply there, a quiet current between two people learning to breathe in the same rhythm. A few hours later, Dr. Wells arrived for Nathaniel's therapy session. "We'll take it easy today," the doctor said. "Your progress has been remarkable." Nathaniel gave a faint nod, gripping the bars as the doctor began. Elena watched from the doorway, the same as always, but this time she noticed something different in him, not just determination, but something almost like hope. "Push through your arms, not your back," Wells reminded him. Nathaniel exhaled sharply and straightened. For a fleeting second, he stood shaking, unsteady but standing. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. "You're doing it," she whispered. He met her eyes, breathless, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. For a moment, then his knees gave out and the doctor caught him before he could fall. The session ended, but Elena stayed behind. She knelt beside his chair, dabbing the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "You did more than a moment," she said softly. "You stood." "Barely," he murmured. "Barely is better than never," she said. He laughed weakly. "You make failure sound noble." "No," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I make effort matter." That night after dinner, Elena found him in the study again, staring at a photograph on his desk, an old picture of him standing beside his father, in front of a private jet, both of them smiling. "You looked happy," she said gently. "That was before everything burned," he answered, "before the engine failed, before I did." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You didn't fail. You survived." He looked up at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "Surviving isn't living, Elena. You don't wake up grateful. You wake up haunted. Then maybe you need to stop remembering who you were," she said, "and start deciding who you want to be now." The words hung in the air between them. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, throwing shadows across the walls. Nathaniel stared at her for a long time before speaking. "You talk about healing as if it's simple." "It's not," she said quietly, "but it's real. For you, maybe. For you too," she whispered. "You just haven't believed it yet." He turned back to the fire, his voice low. "Do you ever think about leaving?" "Every day," she said honestly. "And yet you stay, because I made a promise. You could walk away now. I wouldn't stop you." "And what would you do?" she asked. "Keep pretending I don't care." Her breath caught at the honesty in his tone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then slowly, he reached for his cane, gripping it with one hand. "Walk with me," he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. They made their way through the long corridor that opened to the terrace. The evening light cast everything in amber hues. He took careful, deliberate steps, each one steadying him more than the last. When they reached the end of the terrace, the city stretched out before them, glowing beneath the fading sun. "I used to look at that skyline and feel powerful," he said. "Now I just feel small." "Maybe that's what power really is," she said, "knowing how small you are and standing anyway." He looked at her, and then the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "You have a way with words, and you have a way of testing them. Maybe that's why we work," he said. The wind rose, tugging lightly at her hair. She turned to face him, their eyes locking for a heartbeat longer than it should have lasted. "You're standing on your own," she said. "Not for long," he admitted, shifting his weight to the cane. Still, she whispered, "You're standing." Back inside, the mansion felt warmer, somehow softer. The staff moved quietly through the halls, careful not to disturb the calm that had settled between them. As Elena passed the study later that night, she saw him asleep again, in his chair, the firelight flickering against his face. This time, she didn't cover him with the blanket. Instead, she simply stood there for a while, watching him, realizing that for the first time she wasn't thinking of escape. In her room, she opened her sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw Nathaniel standing beneath the terrace light, the skyline behind him, one hand holding the cane, the other reaching forward. Beneath the drawing, she wrote, "Hope stands taller than fear." Down the hall, Nathaniel stirred from his sleep, his hand twitching faintly. In his dream, he was walking again, not alone, not afraid, but beside her. And for the first time since the accident, he woke without dread. He stared into the darkness and whispered her name like a promise. "Elena." The rain began again outside, soft and steady, but this time it didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like a beginning. The invitation arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, sealed in gold and embossed with the crest of the Carter Foundation. Elena found it among the mail on the marble counter, her name written in neat, deliberate calligraphy. She turned it over in her hands before knocking on the study door. Nathaniel was there as always, surrounded by files and the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass. "It's from the foundation," she said, holding it out. He took it, slit the envelope open with his penknife, and read in silence. After a moment, he set it down, his jaw tightening. "The annual charity gala," he murmured. "They're honoring the rehabilitation program this year." "That's good news, isn't it?" she asked. His eyes lifted to hers, unreadable. "They expect both of us to attend." She froze. The thought of walking into a room full of reporters' cameras and watchful eyes made her stomach twist. "Won't that just fuel the gossip?" he finished dryly. "Probably. But not going would be worse. They'll say I've become a ghost, that the accident broke me." Elena crossed her arms, voice calm but uncertain. "Maybe it did. You just haven't realized you came back different." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "Then I suppose they'll see which parts of me survived." The next few days became a blur of preparations. Stylists came and went. Tailors adjusted tuxedos. A publicist rehearsed polite statements Nathaniel refused to memorize. Elena watched it all unfold from the sidelines until the head maid appeared with a garment bag. "Mr. Carter requested this for you," the woman said, unzipping the bag to reveal an emerald green gown, simple yet stunning, its silk catching the light like water. Elena blinked, confused. "He picked this," he did, the maid replied, then left before she could ask more. That night she tried it on. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the reflection. The woman staring back looked confident, elegant, almost regal. And for a moment she wondered if Nathaniel had seen that version of her all along. The night of the gala arrived with the scent of rain still clinging to the air. The venue was a glass-roofed ballroom overlooking Puget Sound, where chandeliers gleamed like constellations and camera flashes burst like lightning. Nathaniel stood by the car, leaning lightly on his cane, the other hand tucked into his pocket. When he saw her approach, his breath caught for half a second, though he quickly masked it behind his usual composure. "You're late," he said. "You look like trouble," she replied. He smirked faintly. "Good. Trouble gets photographed." They stepped into the ballroom together. Conversations quieted, heads turned, whispers spread through the crowd. That's them, the arranged marriage couple, the charity bride, the paralyzed billionaire. Elena felt the weight of every gaze, but Nathaniel's voice steadied her. Ignore them, look at me. So she did, and in that moment the noise faded. He greeted guests, shaking hands, answering questions with grace. When a reporter asked how it felt to stand again, he smiled thinly. It feels like breathing after holding your breath too long. Applause followed. Elena stood beside him, poised and calm, though her heart was racing. She could feel his tension through the way that his fingers brushed against hers, a silent plea for grounding he'd never admit aloud. As the evening wore on, the host invited him to the stage. Nathaniel hesitated, his grip on the cane tightening. She leaned close and whispered, "You can do this." He nodded once and made his way forward. Cameras clicked furiously as he reached the podium. The lights reflected in his eyes, bright but not blinding. A year ago, he began, his voice steady but soft. I thought my life had ended. I believed strength was control, that losing it made me less of a man. But tonight I've learned something else. He paused, his gaze shifting across the crowd until it found her. Strength isn't about standing alone. It's about the people who refuse to let you fall. The room fell silent. Then came the applause, slow, then rising into thunder. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. For once, his words weren't armor, they were truth. When he returned to her side, she whispered, "You didn't mention my name." He glanced at her, a hint of a smile breaking through. "I didn't need to." Later, as the orchestra played and couples swayed beneath golden lights, Nathaniel offered his hand. "Dance with me." She looked down at his cane, uncertain. "You'll fall. Then you'll catch me," he said simply. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first, then, with rhythm that surprised them both. Cameras flashed again. A photographer whispered, "Seattle's miracle couple." For the first time, neither of them flinched. But just as the music softened, a familiar voice cut through the applause. "How touching," said Margaret Carter. Nathaniel stiffened. His mother approached, her diamond earrings glittering under the chandeliers, her smile sharp as glass. "You've turned tragedy into theater, darling. I hope the applause keeps you standing." Elena froze, her pulse pounding. The crowd pretended not to notice, but whispers stirred again. Nathaniel's voice hardened. "This isn't the place, Mother." Margaret's gaze flicked to Elena. "No, because she seems quite at home, pretending." Before Elena could respond, Margaret turned and swept away. Cameras caught everything. The next morning, headlines screamed across every paper, "Love or lie, the truth behind the Carter Gala." Elena sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through comments full of pity and scorn. Gold digger, actress, PR stunt. Nathaniel entered quietly, his expression unreadable. "They'll move on," he said. She looked up, eyes bright with restrained hurt. "And if they don't, then we'll keep walking," he said simply. She studied him for a long time, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of being strong?" He smiled faintly. "Every day." Outside, the storm clouds gathered again. She reached for his hand without thinking, and for once, he didn't pull away. Later that night, they stood together on the balcony. The wind smelled of rain and salt, the city lights shimmering below. "I thought tonight would destroy me," he admitted. "It didn't," she said softly. "You stood, only because you were there." Their eyes met. The air between them tightened. For a moment he leaned closer, and she didn't move. But before their lips met, a flashbulb went off somewhere below. They stepped apart. The world returned. He sighed. "We can't hide from them forever." "No," she whispered. "But maybe we can stop hiding from ourselves." For the first time that night, he laughed quietly. "You always have the last word, don't you? Only when it's true," she said. Behind them, the storm rolled closer, and the city lights flickered like 1,000 watching eyes. But on that balcony, beneath the hum of thunder, their silence said what neither dared to speak aloud, that the lie they'd built together had somehow become the only honest thing left. The next morning, the Carter mansion woke to chaos. Newspapers lay scattered across the kitchen counter, their headlines screaming from every page. Forced love or fabricated charity, and the paralyzed billionaire and his perfect wife alive for the cameras. Paparazzi had camped outside the gates, shouting questions through the rain. Inside, Elena sat at the table scrolling through cruel comments on her phone. The words blurred together: gold digger fraud, actress, pity project. Her chest ached with a slow, dull burn. Nathaniel stood by the window phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped and calm. Yes, I've read them. No, there's no official statement. Carter Industries will not comment on personal matters. He hung up, exhaling slowly, then turned toward her. You shouldn't look at those, he said. They'll eat you alive. She didn't look up. They're already doing that. Elena. His voice softened. Let it go. How she's asked, setting the phone down with trembling hands. They think I'm playing you, that I used you. He hesitated. They'll forget. She gave a bitter laugh. No one forgets a scandal, Nathaniel, not when it makes them feel better about themselves. Before he could reply, a knock came at the door. The butler appeared pale and nervous. Your mother is here, sir. Nathaniel's expression darkened. Now I tried to tell her you were busy. The butler stammered, but she insisted. Margaret Carter swept in moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Dressed in black and pearls, she looked every inch the empire she commanded. You made us look like fools, she said, her voice cold as steel. Nathaniel straightened. Good morning to you, too. Don't mock me, Nathaniel, she snapped. Do you have any idea what this has done to the family's reputation? He met her gaze evenly. I think the word family stopped meaning much to you the day you turned me into a headline. Her glare shifted to Elena, who rose instinctively. And you, Margaret, said, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. I warned him about you. You were convenient, a perfect image for sympathy. Tell me, was it your idea to cry on cue, or has Elena's jaw tightened? You don't know me. Oh, I know your type, Margaret replied, tossing a thin folder onto the table. You should read your own biography sometime. Elena stared at the folder, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were hospital records, debt notices, and an old loan under her mother's name. Margaret's voice was soft, venomous. Your father's bankruptcy, your mother's unpaid bills, don't act shocked. I had people look into you before the wedding. Nathaniel's voice cut through the silence. That's enough. No, Margaret said, turning to him. You think she married you for love? She sold herself to the highest bidder. Elena's eyes filled with tears, though she held her ground. Is that what you think too? She asked Nathaniel. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The hesitation was all it took. I understand, she said quietly. You needed someone to believe in, and I was convenient. Elena, but she was already walking away. Rain lashed against the windows as she climbed the stairs. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hall until it disappeared entirely. Nathaniel stood motionless, the air between him and his mother thick with fury. You had no right, he said, his voice shaking. I had every right, she replied. I protected you from a mistake. He turned on her eyes, blazing. No, you protected the illusion of control. The same illusion that left me broken in that chair while you told the press I was fine. Margaret blinked, thrown off balance for the first time. Nathaniel. But he was already walking away. By the time he reached Elena's room, it was empty. The wardrobe doors hung open, half of her clothes gone. On the desk, she had left a folded note. He opened it with trembling hands. You once said strength was standing when you couldn't, so stand now, Nathaniel, without me. If our love is real, it won't break. He sank into the chair, the note crumpling in his palm. The storm outside raged louder with thunder rolling over the bay. He pressed his hand to his forehead and whispered her name like a prayer. Hours passed before he moved again. When he finally did, it was toward the therapy room, the same place where it had all begun. The lights flickered as a lightning flashed through the glass. He gripped the steel bars, his breath uneven. Stand now without me. His arms trembled as he pulled himself upright. Every muscle burned, but he refused to stop. You wanted me to stand, he muttered. So watch me. His knees buckled, and he fell hard against the floor. His breath knocked out of him. He stayed there, chest heaving, until he saw something in the reflection of the mirror, the man he used to be and the one he was becoming. Crawling back toward the bars, he tried again, and again. By the fourth attempt, his vision blurred from pains, sweat dripping into his eyes. But then for a fleeting second, he was upright. Lightning struck outside, illuminating him in harsh white light. He stood shaking his hand pressed against the metal rail. It wasn't grace, it was survival. When he finally collapsed again, he laughed through the exhaustion, a strange broken sound that turned into something close to relief. "You see, Elena?" he whispered into the empty room. "I can stand." Moments later, the smell of smoke reached him. He turned toward the corner of the room where a spark from the lightning had caught the curtains. Flames spread quickly, orange light devouring the walls. Panic surged through him. He tried to move his legs weak, his arms heavy. The door burst open. Oliver ran in, shouting, "Nathaniel, we have to go." He tried to pull him up, but Nathaniel pushed his hand away. "The files, my research, forget them," Oliver shouted. He grabbed Nathaniel under the arms and dragged him out, just as the fire alarm screamed through the mansion. Outside in the cold rain, Nathaniel sat on the gravel driveway, coughing, watching as the flames consumed the room that had once been his cage. The smell of smoke mixed with salt and ash. Oliver knelt beside him. "We'll rebuild," he said. Nathaniel stared at the burning glass and whispered, "We'll start over." The fire hissed under the rain, dying slowly. The storm above them began to fade, leaving behind nothing but silence and the faint sound of his own heartbeat. For the first time, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like an ending. He looked toward the bay, the horizon barely visible through the smoke, and said quietly to no one, "She wanted me to stand. I will." The small coastal town of Havenport smelled of salt and pine a world away from the noise and headlines of Seattle. The air was softer here, the rhythm slower. Elena Moore rented a small apartment above a bookshop that overlooked the harbor. Each morning she walked to the community center 2 blocks away, where she taught art therapy to children with disabilities. The walls were covered with drawings, bright suns, uneven hearts, stick figures learning to walk. It wasn't much, but it was honest. One morning, a little boy named Caleb tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Elena, why do you always draw people standing up?" he asked. She smiled faintly, handing him a brush. "Because standing is another word for hope." The boy tilted his head, unconvinced. "Does it work?" "Sometimes," she whispered, "if you believe in it long enough." In quiet moments between lessons, she thought of Nathaniel, his hands trembling against the bars, his voice sharp but vulnerable, the way he looked at her after the gala when he said she was the reason he still stood. She tried not to, but the memories slipped in anyway, like waves finding their way back to shore. Meanwhile, miles away in Seattle, the Carter mansion stood half empty, its burned west wing sealed off with scaffolding. Nathaniel had refused to rebuild the therapy room. "Let it stay as it is," he'd told Oliver. A reminder. What he built instead was something new. A glass pavilion overlooking the bay filled with parallel bars, wheelchairs, and sunlight. A rehabilitation wing for anyone who needed it. The sign outside read, "The Moore Foundation for those learning to walk again." When Oliver saw the name, he raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" Nathaniel nodded. She believed in people who couldn't believe in themselves. That's worth remembering. He was walking better now, still with a cane, but steady. The fire had taken his comfort, not his will. At night, he worked late designing new therapy programs. Sometimes he caught himself writing her name in the margins of notes, then striking it out. One evening, while going through mail in his office, he found an envelope addressed to Mr. N. Carter. No return address. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a small charcoal sketch, 2 figures standing side by side beneath a word scrawled in looping script, "Believe." No signature, but he knew. The paper smelled faintly of turpentine and sea air. He closed his eyes, smiling despite himself. Days turned into weeks and more letters followed. No words, only drawings, a hand reaching upward, a heart half-colored in gold, a child's stick figure holding on to a taller one. Each one arrived without warning, carried by courier always from Havenport. In return, Nathaniel began to write back. His letters were brief, careful. "You once said, 'Hope hurts because it heals.' You were right, but it's the only pain I miss." Another said, "I stood again today. Not perfectly, not proudly, but every step is a promise. Thank you for teaching me how to keep it." He never knew if she received them, but the act of writing kept him steady. Each word was a step forward. In Havenport, Elena received one of his letters on a gray morning. She recognized his handwriting instantly clean, deliberate with a faint tilt at the end of each line. She read it slowly, her heart pounding. If love means standing together, maybe standing apart was the lesson I needed first. I'll be at the Harborville Pier on Sunday at sunset if fate still remembers us." She folded the paper carefully and pressed it against her chest. "Are you okay?" her assistant Mia asked. Elena nodded, forcing a smile. "I think it's time I see how far I've learned to walk." That night she stood before the mirror, brushing her hair until it gleamed. Around her neck she clasped the same silver pendant she had worn the day of the wedding, a symbol of every promise broken and remade. The reflection staring back wasn't the scared girl who had once married for survival. This woman had earned her peace. At dawn, she boarded the early train north, the sky a wash of rose and blue. The world rolled past in blurs of forest and coastline. In her sketchbook, she drew as the train swayed a man standing by the ocean, waiting, his face half turned toward the horizon. She shaded his eyes last careful tender. When she looked at the finished drawing, she whispered, "Please still be there." By the time she reached Harborville, the sky had begun to turn gold. The pier stretched long and quiet over the water. The scent of salt and rain filled the air. She walked slowly, her footsteps echoing against the wooden planks. Nathaniel was already there. He stood near the edge, coat unbuttoned, cane in hand, staring at the sea. For a moment she simply watched him. His posture was straighter now, his presence calmer. He looked like a man who had made peace with gravity. When he turned and saw her, his face changed. Not shock, not disbelief, just quiet certainty, as if he had been waiting forever. "You came," he said softly. She stopped a few steps away. "I never really left." The sun dipped lower, scattering light across the waves. Neither spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of rain and salt. He took a step forward, slow, deliberate, steady. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to see me," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd still be standing," she replied. He smiled faintly. "You taught me how." They stood there in silence for what felt like forever, the sea crashing beneath them, the world narrowing to the sound of breath and heartbeat. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "I wrote this for you," he said, "but I think it sounds better when spoken." She nodded. "I used to think healing meant forgetting what broke you," he said quietly. "Now I know it means learning to walk with it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Then maybe we can walk together." The last light of the sun caught their faces soft and gold. For the first time in years, neither of them was pretending. They were just two people standing at the edge of the world, broken once, but whole enough to begin again. The waves crashed below the pier, carrying away everything that had once kept them apart. The morning light spilled gently across the Harborville shore as Elena and Nathaniel walked side by side. The sea glimmered like glass, soft waves folding against the wooden pier where they had first found each other again. The world around them was quiet, only the call of distant gulls and the hum of life waking up in the little town. Nathaniel moved without his cane, now his steps slow but steady. "The mansion's gone," he said softly. "Maybe that's how it was meant to be." Elena smiled faintly. "Some things have to burn down before they can stand again." He looked at her sunlight catching the edge of her hair. "Then let's build something worth standing for." She nodded, and together they walked toward the future neither of them had expected to have. Weeks later, the crowd at the New Moore Foundation Center was small but genuine. Patients in wheelchairs, families, and children filled the hall, their faces alive with hope. Nathaniel stood at the podium, a simple microphone in hand. No press, no flashing cameras, just people. "When I first built this place," he began, his voice clear and strong, "I thought it was about recovery, about walking again. But it's more than that. It's about believing you still deserve to." The audience was silent, listening. "We fall, we break, and sometimes we lose everything, he continued. "But healing isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about finding someone or something that reminds you to keep trying." His eyes found Elena near the back of the crowd. She smiled softly, tears shining in her eyes. "I once thought love made me weak," he said, "but she showed me it's the reason I'm standing here today." Applause filled the room, not loud or wild, but warm, real. For the first time in years, Nathaniel didn't feel like a headline. He felt human. After the ceremony, they slipped out quietly to the garden behind the center. The roses were in bloom, their scent thick in the warm air. Elena ran her fingers along the petals, remembering the day she had planted them during construction. Nathaniel joined her, his hand brushing hers. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. "Every day," he replied. "You were right. You can't rebuild what you refuse to face." She turned to him. "And now," he smiled, "now I want to meet life the way it is, without fear." He took her hand gently and led her toward the pier that stretched beyond the garden. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and gold, the horizon wide and endless. "You once said you'd stay until I could stand alone," he said quietly. "But I don't want to stand alone anymore." Her breath caught. "Nathaniel." He dropped to one knee, not from tradition, but from gratitude. In his hand was a small velvet box, inside a simple silver ring engraved with one word: believe. No contracts, no conditions, just a promise I choose to make. His voice trembled slightly. "You gave me back my life. Let me spend it giving you back every reason to smile." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I didn't save you," she whispered. "We saved each other." The wind brushed through the roses, and when their lips met, it was slow, certain, and real. For the first time, their story wasn't about pain or pity, it was about healing. Months passed, and life at the foundation flourished. Children laughed in the therapy garden. Patients learned to walk along the paths where sunlight streamed through the windows, and every wall bore Elena's murals, paintings of wings, light, and hope. Nathaniel spent his mornings helping veterans with exercises, his afternoons reviewing plans for a new facility by the sea. They had both found their calling in the space between brokenness and belief. One evening, as the sun began to set, Nathaniel stood by the water's edge, watching the waves roll in. Elena joined him, her hands still stained faintly with paint. "You remember the first time I saw you?" he asked. "You were terrified." She laughed softly. "You weren't exactly friendly. I was afraid," he admitted. "Not of you, of needing you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And now I know," he said, "needing someone isn't weakness. It's human." They stood there in silence as the world dimmed into twilight. The lights from the center flickered on behind them, glowing like stars along the shoreline. In that moment, they didn't need words. Their story had already been written in every step, every scar, every time they refused to give up. The camera of memory would linger on their silhouettes, two figures standing together against the fading light. His hand rested over hers. The wind whispered the same word etched in silver between them: believe. And as the scene faded, the narration carried softly over the ocean breeze. Love doesn't erase what broke us. It teaches us how to live with it, to walk beside it. That's what healing really means. Some stories aren't about falling in love, but learning to stand for it. The sound of waves folded gently into the final pause. Then a warm voice spoke once more. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in love. That heals. Tell us in the comments what moment moved you most. And don't forget to subscribe, and stay with us for more Millionaire stories, where every ending is just another beginning.